After the lights had dimmed and all the ladies were back in the dressing room, there was a marked sadness that our common experience had concluded. In an odd way, contestants in a beauty contest develop a camaraderie similar to what happens to soldiers in war. The sadness also extended to packing away all the finery that had been so carefully picked out and wondrously worn in the quest. For the most crossdressers, this sensation of sadness is a cyclical event. For however many hours that we can get to dress en femme, we are able to express our true inner selves, and then inevitably we have to pack it all up and go back to guydom. Those days were, for me, in the past. However, for I had gone full-time femme for a couple of years prior to the pageant. When or if you go that route, there are additional costs and benefits that the occasional crossdresser does not encounter. Going full-time femme alleviates the anxiety of being outed, a tremendous relief, but it also means that you will go through the psychological ramifications and mental acrobatics that leave you questioning your actual identity. Ultimately, you find yourself asking, who the hell am I? The talent portion of the pageant put that maddening thought in my mind in a big way. Despite my initial hesitation, I found myself completely enamored of being held and kissed by a man. My mind was blown by this and went through alternating what the fuck moments and holy shit moments non-stop. After going through many hours of self-analysis, I concluded that perhaps I was in actuality bisexual, a crossdressing bisexual bordering on a transgender. It became clear that there was no fighting it or denying it, so I decided to just roll with it. After the finery had been packed away and all the requisite New York kisses been completed, it was time to go home. My girlfriend helped me lug the suitcases out to the car and off we went. I was, of course, still dressed femininely in a floral sundress and wedges, and was savoring the experience of the pageant. We rejoiced at my success and were enormously relieved that we had pulled off the competition. This was not a womanless pageant, this was the real deal, and no one even suspected that my plumbing was not entirely female. My mind was racing, and I was left wondering how or if I should speak of my jubilation at being kissed publicly and passionately by a man. I did not have to wait for that moment, for my girlfriend brought it up. She was always good at reading my mind. Having gone full femme for some time by then, I knew that honesty was the best policy. Honesty as a crossdresser is hard, but once achieved is a marvelous stress reliever. I told her the truth. I expected tears and a tirade, but there was none. I told her that I suspected that I was truly bisexual, whereupon she admitted that she too was. She laughed when she explained that having a beautiful, for all intents and purposes female as a partner made her question her own sexuality. She too had figured that she was bisexual and more than a little bit lesbian. She understood and was not the least surprised that I had enjoyed being kissed by a man. We were birds of the same feather, and while that feather was exceedingly unusual, that connection was serendipitous. Nothing had changed, we loved each other as we were. I guess that is what has become to be known as unconditional love. Crossdressers run the gamut from those who only dress minimally, wearing perhaps only ladies' lingerie sporadically, to those for whom the crossdressing becomes a short leap to transgenderism. Having reached that point some time ago, I could not imagine not presenting as a woman. From my C-cup boobs to my high heels, I was almost entirely a woman, a serious girly girl. Participating in the beauty pageant had reinforced that tremendously and had opened my eyes to a new phase, one in which my gender identity had been redefined, and moreover my sexual preferences had expanded from being a hybrid lesbian to a hybrid bisexual. I loved my girlfriend more than I had the words to tell, and really loved our unique lesbian style of lovemaking. It was during this time that I began to imagine having a threesome with a man in our bed. During the years of my ever-increasing feminization, my girlfriend evolved as well. As I became the girly girl, she began to drift in the opposite direction. She had her hair cut into an attractive pixie and started to dress more in jeans and t-shirts than dresses and skirts. As I wholeheartedly embraced the makeup, the gorgeous long hair, and all manner of feminine finery, she went into tomboy mode. She also began to take on the aggressive role in the bedroom and loved kissing and fondling my boobs. We lived as a lesbian couple, and she took on all the guy chores while I did the girl chores. We were frank and honest about our desires and needs, and as my girlfriend knew that I was turned on by kissing a man during the pageant, she began to take on that role both visually and emotionally. As time wore on, it became clear that we were simply meant for each other, and after some soul-searching and a romantic dinner out one evening, she asked me to marry her. I squealed yes, as I nearly fainted, whereupon she reached into her jacket pocket, held out a ring box, and removing the ring from the box, she slid it on my French manicured ring finger. The emotions that ensued were mind-boggling, but this development also opened up a door to a number of considerations that had been locked shut for a few years. Weddings are not just about individuals or couples, but about families and relatives. I dreaded the mere possibility of having to return to my original gender for a wedding, and quite frankly doubted that I could ever pass as a man again. My crossdressing had evolved into transgenderism. I looked, thought, and acted as a woman and only had a singular vestige of my original gender. And so who would be the bride, and conversely who would be the groom, or perhaps there would be two brides as in lesbian unions? Not only that, but looking down the road, would we want children, and would I still be able to impregnate my girlfriend despite having undergone HRT for years? The prospect of marriage unleashed a flood of questions and a hormonal typhoon. There were two certainties though. First was that we would be getting married, and second was that there was no way I would be reverting back to being a man. No way! Despite all the practical concerns that marriage posed, there is a monumental joy to the very prospect of it. While it might seem like an old wives' tale, there are a number of times in a woman's, or near woman's, life when one simply glows, and the time leading up to being a bride is a prime time for it. Glowing is somewhat ethereal, but it manifests as the optimization of one's beauty and femininity. While there is a definite physical aspect to this, the underlying spark is a psychological and emotional cocktail. I glowed. Regardless of the time of day or anything else, I was smiling, ranging from the Mona Lisa smile to the full-on Farrah Fawcett smile, but all day long I smiled. After quite a bit of discussion and back and forth, we decided that our wedding would be lesbian style with two brides. There really was no viable alternative, and it felt entirely right and natural. Our friends and relatives knew us as such and were cool about it. We also spoke of the possibility of having children and tentatively decided that if we were to have children we would adopt. This was entirely consistent with our lesbian identities and was a tremendous relief to me, for I had absolutely no intention of returning to my male self, not even for the short-term goal of fathering children. During the time prior to our wedding, we started to formulate long-term plans as well. Marriage will do that to you, forcing you to think long-term as well as short-term. One consideration that had been waiting in the wings for some time was when or if I should undertake total SRS surgery. Having gone this far, it seemed like the logical thing to do. It would be the ultimate fulfillment of my femininity and an irreversible commitment to womanhood. Thus far in my transformation, there was always a path to retreat from a life as a lady, and while it was distasteful to even consider, it lingered hanging over my head. Ultimately, my fiancé and I decided that the wedding should take precedence over SRS surgery, and rightfully so. Together we had absolutely no doubt about the wedding, but were teetering on the bubble regarding the surgery. It would be insane to try to pursue both objectives at the same time, and so the surgery went on the back burner. Having gone through extensive salon beauty treatments for the pageant, I was left wondering what else might we do before the wedding. I wanted to make sure that I peaked at the altar, as it were, and knew that unlike the pageant, this time all the eyes would be on me. Being a beautiful bride is all about the details, so the planning had to commence now without any delay. Together with my fiancé, we created a list and a schedule for my ultimate bridal beauty regimen. The one thing that is always at the top of the list is the bride's hair. Make no mistake about it, I am my hair. Having said that opens the door as to what would it entail to have the most gorgeous hairstyle that any bride could ever have. Being a blonde was a definite, but what shade of blonde? Growing out my hair even longer than it was now was high on the list, as was having at least some curl to it. Flowers? Absolutely! Should I have an updo or wear it as a loose ponytail? Perhaps a braid intertwined with baby's breath flowers, maybe a simple chignon. I started my bridal hair quest by buying every bridal magazine I could and scouring the internet for hairstyling ideas. I chuckled looking back on just how simple my life had been as a guy as far as my hair was concerned. My hair now was serious business and seriously time-consuming. The only thing that was certain was that I needed professional help, but for now simply growing out my hair from shoulder length to mid-back length was the plan. In retrospect, there is one thing that really sticks out about weddings, and that is that tremendous amounts of planning and coordination goes into structuring an event that lasts only a few hours. I did not quite understand that at the time, but soon found out that the actual wedding would be the culmination of months of preparation and planning. The preparation part was largely on me, for my fiancé had gotten a bit unisexual in the past year, was not going to be the one to go all out to be the stunning bride. She went so far as to stipulate that she did not want to be the one in the intricate wedding gown with all the trimmings, and that she would be wearing a relatively simple pantsuit. I, on the other hand, was committed to experiencing it all, the comprehensive bridal preparation regimen and schedule. Having lived the life of a girly girl for a few years before getting engaged gave me a leg up on it all, but this was different, for as a 99% woman I knew that this singular event, getting married, was going to make all others pale by comparison, therefore I had to be perfect. One of the persistent and difficult aspects to my preparation was to be figure control and weight loss. The old saying about there not being any such thing as being too rich or too skinny applied. I had already trimmed down significantly since my guy days, to a firm 125 pounds, but now I found the motivation to go further. I realized that women who are at the lower end of the weight spectrum tend to be more focused on attaining a particular dress size than necessarily a particular weight. At a height of 5 feet 6 and a weight of 125 with size 36C boobs, my dress size was a 7, a bit large, but mostly to accommodate my girls. There is really nothing wrong with that, but what bride-to-be is ever satisfied? I knew that with some dedicated effort I could whittle myself down to a size 6, but anything below that would be insane. The months that ensued became a bridal trial by fire, with daily running, yoga, and dieting, and while all that was hard, it was worthwhile, for as the pounds came off, my physique became as toned and slender as could be. I always had unusually large hips, which the HRT had enhanced, but I also worked on my rear with squats and lunges. All of this, combined with the fact that I had worn 4-inch or better heels almost exclusively for years, had resulted in a rather pronounced bubble butt. High heels are a wonder of feminine butt building. Jlos got nothing on me. As my waist shrank and my rear ballooned, I finally achieved the classic wasp waist figure, which made me wonder what could be achieved by adding tight waist corseting to the routine. I had already gone through so many evolutions in my crossdressing/transgenderism, so why not go for it? I wanted to experience it all and was heading headlong into majorly enhanced femininity. If you purchase a corset online, it will probably not be either the right size nor the right type, and for that reason it is best to spend the money and visit a corset shop. I had decided right from the beginning that I wanted to not only have the most spectacular bridal gown that we could afford, but that I wanted all the lovely old-fashioned lingerie to go with it. Heels, stockings, a full bridal corset with garters, and everything white and lacy. With these goals in mind, my fiancé and I located a corset shop within driving distance and made an appointment for a consultation and fitting. By the time of the day of our corset appointment, I had taken the time to research corsets and identify what I wanted. There are a handful of different types of corsets, and I decided that I wanted a couple of waist training corsets for daily wear and a full bridal corset for the big day. In preparation for the appointment, I made sure to wear my finest lingerie and sheerest of stockings, a matched panties, garter, and Victoria's Secret bra trimmed in white lace underneath my flowery dress. I wore strappy white 4-inch heels and full makeup along with some of my best jewelry. I had my hair done up in a chignon with a flowery hairpin and felt that while I might not be quite a full 10, I was at least a 9.9. One of the wonderful side effects of my years of learning to be a woman and living full-time as such was confidence. I was thrilled at the knowledge that heads would turn as the lovely sound of my heels clicking announced the arrival of a beautiful woman. We arrived at the corset shop and were warmly greeted by the owner, an elegant and beautiful woman by the name of Suzanne, who appeared to be in her early 50s. As I extended my slender manicured hand to greet her, I smiled widely, as did she, for we both knew that our time together that day would be both fun and enlightening. After exchanging pleasantries, my fiancé and I were escorted to the changing and fitting rooms towards the back of the store, where the next splendorous evolution was to take place. Once there, I marveled at the totally feminine decor and furnishings. It was as though anything even remotely masculine had been banished forever, as in the mythological island of Themyscira. Once settled, and Suzanne asked that I remove my dress so that I could be measured precisely. This was an entirely new experience, for nothing that I had previously worn was determined with quite so much precision. There I was teetering a bit as I tried to stand still on my heels while attired in my lovely, scanty, and overwhelmingly feminine lingerie. I tingled with excitement and the knowledge that while this evolution might be a bit uncomfortable and restricting at times, it would produce the spectacular results that I had hoped for. Once I had been measured, Suzanne, my fiancée, and I discussed what we wanted and were then presented with samples of corsets that would work for my current proportions. I tried each of them on and then got to feel the exquisite tightening of the laces as my midsection was reduced to ridiculously small proportions. Corsets can be daunting, but it helps to remember to take smaller breaths and more of them. Wearing a corset is a constant reminder of the necessity to maintain a feminine posture and pace similar to the act of wearing high heels. The combination of the heels and the corset, which not only restricted my waist but made my boobs all the more prominent, created the most enviable of feminine forms, a classic hourglass shape. There is a fragility and a totally demurely dainty aspect to wearing a full corset, which is a bit uncomfortable until you get used to it, but if you can tolerate it, the results are spectacular. All other things being equal, a woman wearing a corset will generate a significantly greater wow factor than one who does not. My measurements in both my present and desired dress size were noted, but my big day was still months off. We agreed on what my target measurements were to be confident that they were within reach. When I left there, I wore the full corset that I had purchased under my dress, and the difference was remarkable, for where my dress was the perfect size a scant few hours ago, it was now a bit large. I bought a full bridal corset and 2 waist training corsets that day, and now had no doubt that by the day of my wedding I would be the picture of the perfect bride. My fiancé and I went out on the town for dinner, and while she chowed down on a man-sized steak, I nibbled on a chicken salad, of which I ate only half of. Femininity is more than just about gender and sex, it is about a lifestyle dedicated to an ideal. Every genetic girl dreams of the day of her wedding. This fantasy starts before puberty and takes legs the first formal wedding they attend. If a young girl is lucky enough to be a flower girl at a relative's wedding, then the ambition to be that gorgeous bride, the center of all attention, takes on a life of its own. When I was quite young, I attended one of my aunt's weddings and became entranced by her beauty and all the bridal trimmings. My aunt was a slender blonde possessed of extraordinarily feminine looks, and I admired her greatly. I too wanted all of that, for I did not simply admire her, I dreamed of being her one day. Formative experiences are like that for the dedicated crossdresser. Often if you look back, you can often pinpoint that moment when your path was set. While I was still possessed of a snippet of my previous life as a guy, I had the same dreams. A wedding for a woman is the ultimate display of her femininity, a state of girlish euphoria. Every last detail of that dream, that vision, is explored and considered. Perhaps the most exciting of the details is the wedding gown. The selection is endless and daunting, with nearly infinite options and choices to be made. While my wedding was still many months away, my fiancé and I knew that this detail, this once-in-a-lifetime wedding gown, needed to be addressed as soon as possible. When perfection is the goal, planning and preparation are required, so after poring over countless websites, we began to narrow the field and answer the most important details, including vintage or modern, length, color, sleeves, closures, veil, train, and style of bodice. Once we had determined the basic preferences, we then went to a number of bridal shops to start the process of completing the vision of bridal perfection that we both wanted. While this process was both frustrating and time-consuming, my fiancé and I worked as a team to make the experience as fun and fulfilling as possible. By the time we started looking seriously at wedding gowns, I had made it nearly down to my desired size 6 and had gotten to the point that I almost enjoyed wearing the corsets. One of the many joys of being a prospective bride are the multiple salon visits, all of which are geared to ensure the most spectacular of possible results for the big day. In the pursuit of perfection, I often felt like a canvas with which the ladies at the salon could experiment to test various looks. Most of the time it was thoroughly enjoyable, and I desperately looked forward to each appointment. No stone was left unturned, starting with skincare and most particularly maintaining an utterly hair-free and baby-smooth body. This had been largely accomplished over the last few years through regular waxing, but now was nearly obsessive. Every last inch of me was wonderfully soft and smooth, made all the more so by lotioning every few hours. Smooth hair-free skin is absolutely requisite for any beautiful woman and even more so for a bride. It is time-consuming and occasionally painful but abundantly worth every minute and every ouch. Once you have felt the silks and satins against your bare girlish skin, you will know just how delightful it is. I have often noticed how genetic women smile far more than men. I know that the sensations of total depilation provide just that. Another routine that became more of a focus than it had ever been was my facial care and eyebrow maintenance. This routine became nearly a fanaticism in my bridal preparations. Skin masks are essential if you want the porcelain look. Complete with cucumber slices over your eyes, they look quite weird, but the end product is rewarding. My eyebrows were taken to the next level, arched and tapered and then enhanced even further with eyebrow pencil. They were the perfect frame for my eye makeup. I also tried and got hooked on false eyelashes, which gave my eyes even more punch. Learning how to put on a pair of false eyelashes will seriously test your patience, but as with all things in time, you can master it and it becomes routine. In the months preceding my wedding, innumerable combinations of eye makeup and lipstick were applied, revised and reapplied. There are as many varieties of makeup as there are times of day and types of clothing. Bridal makeup is an art unto itself. There is literally no end to the variety of looks that can be achieved, and I became even more dependent on it than ever before. There were simply no longer any dress-down days. My face was now my future, and makeup provided the ultimate boost. As I progressed through the bridal preparations, I also worked to expand my daily wardrobe to maximize my feminine aspirations. Were it not for my fiancé's inherited wealth, this would not have been possible, but now my shopping took on a life of its own. I shopped on a nearly daily basis to find the best of the best in formal, evening, and special occasion clothing. There is an exquisite beauty to shopping when looking your feminine best. So many women dress down for shopping, with many looking downright atrocious, but not I. I found that the real joy of shopping could only be found when you look spectacular already: heels, hose, full makeup, hair done to perfection, and the appropriate accessories to match. If you are willing to go to the trouble to look your best, the sales staff will notice and treat you like royalty. I came to think of it as sophisticated shopping, perhaps as only the finest ladies in Paris had devised. There would be no schlepping around Pennies or Sears for me. I patronized the small specialty shops where only the best of one-of-a-kind clothing, lingerie, and jewelry could be had. It got to the point where the sales staff at these stores recognized me and knew me by name. Having undergone rigorous figure training and dieting, my proportions had become perfect for some of the most gorgeous of designer dresses. I know I sound like I'm bragging, but all of this focus and work to achieve perfection has to have some reward, doesn't it? Psychologically, I had accepted that nothing less than utterly gorgeous femininity was not only my goal but my occupation. For the months that preceded the wedding, I had the luxury of being able to focus only on my own admittedly narcissistic vocation. It was an absolutely glorious time, for there can be no better life than that of a young, wealthy, and beautiful woman who knows the power of beauty and revels in it. Along with the joys of the pursuit of feminine perfection for an upcoming wedding come the anxieties that all the preparation entails. I don't remember either before or after my wedding getting so detailed in planning anything. While it generally goes against my nature to create written schedules and to simply wing it for most things, this was different. It was different in that all the attention would be on me, and as such I became obsessive that everything be perfect. Perfection is elusive though, and not quite a human trait, but regardless, I never worked harder for anything in my life as I worked for morphing myself into the perfect bride and for the wedding to be spectacular. A lesson that I learned in this whole process is that being a woman is a lot of work, and that women are held to a much higher standard in virtually every way than any man is. My fiancé was now more or less playing the male role, certainly as far as wedding preparations were concerned, and while I was knocking myself out over the details of my appearance and the wedding, my beloved was taking a back seat. I was admittedly envious that my fiancé and I had traded places in all ways, and to the point in that she could eat anything and as much as she wanted, whereas I was forced to eat rabbit food sparingly. There would be no more pizza or ice cream for me, for the priority of achieving and maintaining a minuscule dress size was paramount. I was beginning to get a bit miffed at this, but if you chose to not just be an occasional woman but a full-time lady and moreover a bride, you have to accept all that goes with it. Regardless, the joys of the pursuit of total and consummate feminine beauty far outweighed all other concerns. The wedding checklist was endless and was comprised of overlapping circles of concerns, including my physical and beauty goals and all that entailed, scheduling of venues and attendance services such as flowers and catering, outreach to friends and relatives, and the details of the preparation for our honeymoon. I became very much overwhelmed and exhausted by it all and ultimately enlisted the help of a wedding planning service to deal with it. Honestly, this was a lifesaver in so many ways, and while it was expensive, it freed me up to do what really gave me the most satisfaction, namely the completely unfettered focus on my feminine appearance. I know that this is selfish and narcissistic, but when else is a girl allowed to live the life of a princess? From a very young age, when I first experimented with my mother's clothes and my lips glistened with her red lipstick, I had longed for what every genetic girl and every radical crossdresser/transgender wants: the acceptance, recognition, appreciation, and admiration of my feminine beauty, not just in the manifestation of appearance but in its totality. Weddings are not just about the couple being married. Duh, I know. Anytime family is involved, things get complicated. You choose your friends but not your family. Number 2. If you live a conventional lifestyle, weddings can be complicated, but if your lifestyle is admittedly not quite conventional, it can be alternately daunting or infuriating. Luckily, in some ways, for me, my father had passed away when I was 23, leaving me with my mother and my older sister for a nuclear family. My father was aware of my crossdressing and transgender lifestyle and downright negative about it. Arguing with or just disagreeing with my father was little more than an exercise in futility and often verged on physical violence. At his funeral, I wore a suit and tie with my long hair tied in a low ponytail and tucked into my shirt. I then swore that I would never again capitulate to his vision for me. I am sure that many of my readers have had similar experiences. When all is said and done, the choice is simple, at least in my mind, and that is that you either capitulate to the life and lifestyle that others foist upon you, or you live your life as you chose. Be phony or be real. Either choice comes with a price, but having chosen to be real, my joy far outweighs my regrets. Despite the lingering foul taste of my father's persona and opinions, the really good news was that my mother and sister fully accepted and appreciated me as I am. What sometimes leaves us hiding in the closet, fearful of not being accepted and being ridiculed or shunned, just does not materialize. The greatest fear is the fear of the unknown, which once known loses its teeth. My fiancé's family was fully supportive of both she and I, and the knowledge of this more than balanced out the memory of my father. Throughout my life as a gender rebel, I have come to see that those who would ridicule and condemn you are in the minority despite all the noise they make. What is unfortunate is that those who would support you or have a neutral opinion say nothing for the fear of being castigated by the hateful ones. What is really fucked up is how the hateful rationalize their hate based on notions of religion. Their hypocrisy and hate comes from a vile place. So much for the biblical admonition, love one another as I have loved you. My fiancé and I decided that we did not need a church wedding, largely for this reason, and while not particularly religious, we both believed that we were blessed with both our expression of our true selves and our love for each other. Having chosen a civil ceremony opened up many options as to the where and when. We chose to have a combination wedding ceremony and reception in one of the smaller rooms of a local banquet hall. We nearly chose to just elope when faced with the bill for this, but in so much as we were convinced that this would be the first, last, and only wedding we would ever have, we went all the way. All of the customary arrangements were made, and we scheduled a justice of the peace to conduct the ceremony. Once everything had been arranged and locked in place on the calendar, we had an enormous sense of relief. We even managed to secure plane fare and hotel reservations for our honeymoon in Bermuda. As we worked through the checklist, we settled on the guest list and a printer for the invitations. One of the traditional and therefore expected aspects of weddings is the registration for gifts thing. Together we created an eclectic list, to say the least, but my list was heavily leaning on high-end lingerie and shoe stores. There would be no toasters or vacuum cleaners for me. There are some things a girl can never have enough of: go big or go home. After all the standard and relatively fun stuff had been arranged, we now had to deal with might be the most intimidating even, the engagement party. Engagement parties are, in theory, an opportunity for the families of the engaged couple to meet and start to bond as an extended family. That's the operative concept, but it was initially envisioned at a time long before non-conventional unions. For better or worse, our impending marriage would be thought by most as non-conventional. I knew that my mother and sister were going to be entirely supportive, but my cousins would leave me wondering about their acceptance of me, and my lesbian union caused quite a bit of anxiety on my part. It might be one thing for her family to accept a lesbian union, but perhaps quite another for them to accept a transgender/crossdresser to genetic woman union. In the end, my fiancé and I decided to keep my full background and birth gender a private matter. All the relatives would know was that their loved ones loved their own gender. Meeting the whole family was not the debacle that I had feared, and the whole party was done and over in about 3 hours. By this time I had lived as a woman for years, a gorgeous woman if I dare say so, and no one would have imagined that I was ever anything but a vivacious and attractive woman with an extreme love for her fiancé. I dressed to the nines in a midi-length ivory lace dress with my hair up in a bun, while my fiancé wore a simple pantsuit. The role reversal that had more or less fell into place between my fiancé and I was now complete, and there was no doubt as to our respective personas. As the time for the marriage came closer into view, I pretty well flew into a hormone-driven girly cycle, alternating between being girlishly giddy and girlishly anxious. There is so much to be done and so much to decide that it was nearly overwhelming. Having hired a wedding planner was the best move I ever made, for it freed me up to focus on myself and my beauty regimen. By the time it was a few weeks before the wedding, I spent a few hours at least on perfecting my look. The combination of diet and exercise had paid off, and if anything I had exceeded my weight and shape goals. While I had a little wiggle room to eat just a bit more, I still dieted, with only fruit, vegetables, and boiled chicken in small portions being my staple. My metabolism had morphed along with the rest of me, and being slim was no longer a goal, it was a lifestyle. Most women are continually on one diet or another, and while initially I balked at doing so, it was now the only way I could imagine living. Every day was spent perfecting my feminine persona and appearance. Skin care was a daily event, complete and utter depilation was enforced, makeup and hair were professionally addressed. The last-minute dress fittings were an utter joy, for through discipline and motivation I was fully ready to be a gorgeous bride. Knowing that I was peaking as a beautiful woman gave me a tremendous amount of confidence. Beauty has its price, but the benefits far exceed the price. The last 2 details for the wedding were finalized a few days before the wedding. Hair and makeup were now the focus. A bride's hair, color, cut and style are her crowning glory. I had heard the phrase crowning glory before, but never quite appreciated its full meaning until now. I wanted the most feminine and deliciously blonde hairstyle that anyone had ever seen. It started with the color, and I had chosen a light buttery blonde shade. I had been a blonde for most of the last 10 years, but some shades of blonde have a greater degree of extreme femininity than others. Once my hair had been colored, I had to zero in on the style. The decision to go with buttery blonde was easy, the style was a good deal harder, but after looking through dozens of bridal magazines I had winnowed the selection. I have always enjoyed the sensation of my long hair tickling my shoulders and back, and didn't much care for an updo, so I went the route of simple yet elegant with a flowery hair clip. My stylist agreed, of course, with my selection, and then proceeded to trim my hair to precisely achieve my desired look. The final hairstyling would occur on the morning of the wedding. I was relieved to have made what was probably the most important of my bridal beauty decisions, and was looking forward with tremendous anticipation towards the result. I was beginning to relax, confident that everything was coming together. I began to savor every minute with otherworldly joy. All of my crossdressing and transgender ambitions and experiences had led this, and despite having sat on the bubble gender-wise in my earlier years, I was now all in. I could not imagine a finer feeling than being the beautiful bride. On the morning of the wedding, my fiancé and I awoke in each other's arms with a newfound energy, a tingle in anticipation of the day's significance, its meaning, and its sublime pleasures. The time came for me to head to the salon, and as a white limousine arrived I gave my soon-to-be spouse a long and loving kiss. My bridesmaids had already been picked up by the limo. They had stayed in a local hotel together, and they let out a giggling roar as I left my house towards the car. The plan was for my bridesmaids and I to all go to the salon and undergo the final hair and makeup ministrations. The salon routinely pulled out all the stops with extra stylists and technicians to support the bridal party. They did it all, and with an enthusiasm that mirrored our own. My hair was done to perfection and I could not be happier. Having someone else do your hair is divinely sensuous. The makeup was understated with the goal of keeping a youthful and nearly virginal look. This is an art form that only the professionals can achieve, makeup so subtle that it looks totally natural. The jewelry was next with simplicity and elegance the theme. Pearl drop earrings and a simple pearl choker were added along with pearl bracelets. I then removed my skirt, blouse and lingerie and stepping behind a screen with my bridesmaids to help I slipped into my bridal lingerie. The bridal corset was divine but only had to be lightly laced snug. The white stockings were attached to my garters and then I stepped into my gown. The gown was drawn up around me and the numerous buttons that closed it in place were fastened by my maid of honor, my sister. My sister and I had bonded over our mutual femininity in the years of my transition. I came to realize that we had become closer than we ever could have as brother and sister. There was no acknowledgement or consideration given to my long-past gender, there was only the beautiful bride rightfully reveling in her femininity. Once we had been completely treated to the salon's bridal regime, it was time to head to the reception hall that was to be the venue for both the wedding and the subsequent reception. My bridesmaids made sure that no part of my gown from my train to my veil came to harm and somehow I managed to back into the limo with my decidedly bubble but leading the way. We arrived at the hall, we went through the last-minute checks and stood in formation waiting for the Bridal March to be played. I smiled the smile that only a beautiful bride could smile. I don't think I was able to breathe and I know that my heels barely touched the tile below me, but the moment had come, there would be no turning back ever. I was now a woman and a bride. We had decided to keep some of the traditional events in our ceremony, including the Bridal March, the toast, the reading out loud of our vows, and the garter toss. I waited in the vestibule of the hall as my bridesmaids worked to get my train and veil perfect as I absolutely delighted in all the attention. Since my biological father was long since out of the picture, I had talked my mother into being the one to hold my manicured hand and walk me up the red carpet to the front of the hall where the ceremony was to be held. All of this had a truly surreal aura to it. I had come such a very long way since the first time my fiancé had shaved my body and permed my hair and totally supported me in becoming the woman I am today. All of the details that exude femininity had become a part of me, from the joys of having a totally smooth and curvy body to the makeup and hair routines. I remembered back to the first time my fiancé had permed my hair and how strange and foreign those curlers felt, but now doing my hair and keeping it pretty every day was completely accepted. Sleeping in rollers and mastering curling irons were the norm now. Walking in high heels was easy, even going up and down stairs. What was once foreign and a bit frightening was now normal. I loved every last bit of being a feminine woman and knew that this was who I was meant to be. I started to tear up about it all. The emotions of a beautiful bride were overtaking me. One of my bridesmaids handed me a tissue and I carefully daubed my eyes, not messing up my makeup one bit. The Bridal March started to play and the doors to the hall swung open. My mother and I kept pace with each other as our heels clicked in unison, one feminine step at a time, until we reached the front of the hall where my betrothed waited for me. There is no scrutiny like the scrutiny that a bride will feel as she walks up the aisle for her wedding. Every single eye was glued to me and I simply smiled as I had never smiled before. In every single detail, spare one, I was now a gorgeous bride. Those who knew the whole truth of my gender, namely my mother, my sister, and just a few of our close friends, were entirely supportive of us, and those who did not would never have guessed. All of the preparation had paid off and I was now as close to being a 10 as I could ever imagine. There is nothing in this world as awesome as that. As I walked slowly with the most divinely feminine small steps for the Bridal March, I noticed that my soon-to-be wife had gone a different route than I and was wearing a white tuxedo rather than a wedding dress. In the months preceding our marriage, she had gotten progressively more butch as I had gotten progressively more femme. Somehow that was fitting and made it so she and I were more partners than competitors. I think that sometime in the years since I had gone full-time as a woman, she realized that she had no desire to try to keep up with me, much less compete with me, so that she more and more had assumed the macho role. Together we had achieved gender role reversal. I entirely enjoyed all the routines of maintaining a totally feminine appearance, and she felt great relief in no longer having to undergo all that. When my mother and I reached the front of the hall, Catherine smiled widely and gently pulled back my veil to kiss me as all brides want to be kissed. This kiss seemed to go on forever and I did not want it to end. The hall cheered, and I then and there came to realize the meaning of the phrase blushing bride. The ceremony itself, not being religious, lasted about 15 minutes, and after we had exchanged vows, bestowed wedding rings upon each other, we walked together arm in arm to dais, where we were seated dead center with our wedding party bookending us on either side. Sitting with a train is nearly impossible, so before I sat down my bridesmaids removed the train. Usually in a conventional wedding the best man gives the toast, but suffice to say ours was not a conventional wedding, so my sister, the maid of honor, did the toast. The champagne flowed and my wife and I kissed demurely and gently to avoid messing up our makeups. As is customary whenever anyone in the hall clinked their glass with a spoon, we kissed as well. Shortly thereafter the hors d'oeuvres were served, and while we nibbled my bride and I mingled. Each part of the reception, while fun and exciting, was also a challenge to me to be as gracious, charming, and feminine as possible. Simply walking in a bridal gown is a challenge. I had learned long ago that long gowns were booby traps for my heels and wore only midi and knee-length skirts and dresses as a result. All of my anxieties were disproven, and I dare say that I left them floored. While still on our feet the band played the song that we had chosen for our first dance together, and now I was Ginger Rogers dancing backwards in high heels and a long gown. How I did not wind up on the floor amazes me to this day, but I guess I was so excited that my feet hardly touched the ground. After our first dance the floor was open to the guests and they continued to dance, including doing the time-honored conga line thing, corny but fun. After some dancing and a bit more champagne, I and my maid of honor went to the ladies' room to touch up our makeup and make sure that our hair had remained gorgeous, and then returned to the dais for a light meal. I had my usual dainty salad, and then on to the cake cutting, eventually the garter toss. All of the traditional bases were stepped on in grand form. This day of all days would remain in my memory in great detail as the ultimate achievement in my journey into total womanhood. Beauty, grace, and style as the gorgeous bride was achieved, all the while basking in the admiration of all the guests and, of course, my bride. I doubt that there could be anything more splendid than that. After the garter toss and as things were starting to wind down, my bridesmaids and I adjourned to an adjacent dressing room to change into our post-reception finery. There are moments that a girl simply wishes would never come, and for me that was when, with the help of my bridesmaids, I removed my wedding gown. There is a profound emotion to that elegant item. It is worn once and then put away as an heirloom, perhaps to be used again in years by another young bride in the family. From my earliest forays into my mother's underwear drawer to now, there was an undeniable evolution, not just in my appearance but in my character, mindset, and emotions. Having shed virtually every last bit of my birth gender, I was now free to be who I was destined to be, a full-fledged beautiful woman with all the trimmings and, for better or worse, the emotions. I was now allowed to cry either tears of joy or otherwise. I could wear whatever I chose and strive for beauty in both my appearance and the rest of my life. I saw that emotion coming and had prepared for it by having a nearly equally spectacular tea-length ivory lace dress for my post-wedding attire. I replaced my bridal lingerie with a frosty white matching lace-trimmed bra and panties enhanced by a garter and sheer silk stockings. My sister carefully folded my gown and veil away into an ivory trunk as I touched up my makeup and got ready to rejoin my beautiful bride back in the hall. When I got back to the hall, I found my bride, and she had also dressed down a bit, largely to be comfortable for our limo ride to the airport and our flight to Bermuda for our honeymoon. While still clearly a woman, she had downplayed her own femininity in contrast to my own. After the last kisses were made and the best wishes of all were received, my bride and I walked slowly, waving to all as we made it to the limo waiting for us out under the portico. I was in seventh heaven, knowing that in essence I had fully arrived as a beautiful bride and spouse to my wife. After all the work and all the hopes and dreams, we were now to be whisked away to our honeymoon in one of the most idyllic locales on the planet, Bermuda. From such things dreams are made. Soon I would shed the last remaining vestige of my birth gender, but for now it's sunshine, bikinis, and pina coladas.